We're here. We're live. This is Parenting Porcupines, Season 2, Episode 3. We're going to get this going. You'll notice it's not all libertarian moms this time, but don't worry. We'll introduce him. He'll play nice with the rest of us. Hang in there just 1 second. We're about to get going. Libertarian moms and dad this week. Yay. So I'm Casey. I'm here in the Midlands of South Carolina, and we are part of the South Carolina Libertarian Party, Parenting Porcupines. Thanks to the SDLP for its support of our broadcast and our show. And I've got one daughter. Her name is Holly. She's 12. She's homeschooling. We've been having some battles related to swim team, which I think Jessica told me more moms need to be assholes. That has been me this week. I've been the asshole mom all this week. Practice. We'll have a whole episode on that coming up. Jessica, tell us who you are, where you are, and who your kids are.
Hey guys, I'm Jessica, and I'm in the upstate of South Carolina. I live in Greenville. I have two sons. One is 12, and the other one is 9.
All right. And Melissa, what about you?
I'm down in Charleston in the Low Country, and I've got two girls, are 6 and 7, and my son is 10.
And you have kitty cat earphones, and you showed us the purple ones before we went on screen too. Are these deterrents, like so your kids won't steal your earphones?
Oh no, these are theirs.
They're there.
They've broken every other pair in the house. So.
Nice. I dig those. Viewers of the show will notice that Alex looks a little bit different this week. We've welcomed in a good friend of ours from Lexington, South Carolina. Casey Crow is the Lexington County chairperson for the Libertarian Party and is sitting in tonight as Libertarian Dad. Tell us, Casey, about your kid.
Yeah, so like Casey said, I'm out in Lexington County, and my son is 6 years old. His name's Charlie, and just like everybody else, I'm trying to raise a porcupine, so.
Yeah, you know, a little bit at a time, right? So how old is Charlie?
He's 6. He turned 6 in November. So I don't know what year it is anymore. So we're probably almost 6.5, which would be important if he were 6. So
that's right. 6.5 would be pretty important if we're actually
right.
6. That's what Holly keeps telling me. She's almost 13. I'm like, not almost 13. You're 12 and
change.
12 and 10. Yeah. All right. So tonight's idea or tonight's topic is lemonade stands part 2. Last week we started talking about how government regulations and permit laws infringe on entrepreneurship, specifically on kid entrepreneurship. And we had a few examples of lemonade stands getting shut down. And we got, I think, a little into the taxation and the deterrent for small business owners in general. And so we didn't want to let that momentum go. So despite we're sort of hitting you with it, Casey, like, here's what we're going to talk about today. I think maybe we've been prepping you for this all week, though. We wanted to talk about how taxation kills business. The idea that repeated taxes, the government interference, red tape, regulations, permitting, licensing, all these things where government comes out and says you cannot make a living because you have to give us half your living is deadly to entrepreneurship. So we're going to start with that tonight. And Jessica, you prepped our show notes today. You're leading this charge today. So why don't I stop talking and let you lead the charge here, jumping off on our main idea and giving us a little background.
Yeah, so like Casey said, you know, we wanted to feed into, because we talked last week about how the licensing requirements can really kind of deter people from entering the market. But another part of that is the taxation, because, you know, a lot of what you make is taxed. And there was an interesting article that I found when I was looking at things for this episode. It was written by Fee back in 2019. So it is a little older, but it was in Utah. They had like this kind of fair for kids where they could come and they could put things on display. It's what I would say was like a kid flea market kind of thing. And they switched it up in this year. And there's an article that's linked. The article is linked in our show notes, but they decided they were going to tax the kids on their earnings from this this little flea market, so to speak. I can't remember what they call it. It's an entrepreneur market is what they called it, a children's entrepreneur market. So I just thought that article was very interesting because, you know, we talk about the lemonade stands being shut down because they don't have the licensure or the permits or whatever. But you don't really think about kids being taxed for their income on these things, but it does happen. So
I just can't even get, like, my head doesn't wrap around that. That, like, if you're, so say Holly's got a bunch of toys that she doesn't use anymore, right? Like stuffed animals and things like that. If she wanted to go out there and sell them on the street, you know what I mean? Like, of course we'd be like, well, we spent a lot of money on those toys. We should get part of it. So we can have like a parent tax on this. But for the city to come forward and be like, you're selling your stuffed animals and but at the, you know, yard sale or whatever. And so you should also pay a tax on that. I mean, I wonder about that. Do we pay taxes on yard sales? Do you pay tax? Like if you have I've never had a yard sale.
I don't.
You absolutely are supposed to.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yep.
I lost all my money in a boating accident.
I can't even imagine, like, who would do that? Who would be like, well, 10% of what I sold of my own crap is, you know, belonging to the government did nothing. They did nothing to participate in that exchange at all.
They certainly were not up at 5 a.m. hauling stuff out to the yard. I mean,
they didn't buy the stickers where you put the price tags on everything either.
I don't know about y'all, but I've never made more than $100 off of a yard sale. So,
I think you're doing pretty good if you make $100. Goodness gracious. Yeah. I've never spent more than $100
in our house and moved to South Carolina. We literally sold almost everything we own, including our furniture, our bedroom set, our dining room set, our living room set. Then we made some money, but other than that.
Did you pay taxes on that in Connecticut? Sales tax?
I
plead the fifth. You can plead the fifth. That'd be okay.
I did not. Because, well, that was in 2010. So I think it's 10 years. I can say, no, we do not claim any of that.
But that's previously owned stuff. Like you paid taxes on that stuff when you bought it the first time around.
Yep.
So why are you having
on the income when you earn the income to buy it?
I don't know. I bought a used car. I still have to pay sales tax on that.
Great. Googly moogly. There's just too much of this. There's just too much of it. Every wage we have. Go ahead, Jessica.
I think Casey just made like a really good point, which is something that we really wanted to point out in this episode was that when you bought those things that you're selling, so they're taxing what you're making off of those things. When you bought them, you paid a sales tax on them.
And with money you've already paid.
The money that, yeah. So it's like tax, 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 tax.
Unless you're spending your stimulus money on it.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the government's money going right back into the economy, right? Is anybody paying off debt with their stimulus checks? There you go. I was going to say, like, somebody is frowning. Somebody in Washington wants you to buy a mattress, Casey.
I'm paying off dental work.
I'm paying off real estate investment debt. So thank you, Uncle Sam.
Yeah, or Joe Biden.
Or my great-grandchildren.
Yes, thank you to your great-grandchildren who will bear the burden for that. There's no way to opt out of taxes. I think that was a good point, Jessica, that you made in the show notes. If you're looking for the show notes, they're out on the blog. It's parentingporcupines.com. And we usually follow along with that outline. There's some hyperlinks there to some additional reading for you. But I thought it was really interesting you made this point about the opt-out box, because while we elect the people who make these rules, we don't actually get to decide what they're going to tax, right? Like nobody said, they don't put this mandate in front of us and say, vote on this tax or vote on that tax. These are our elected officials that say they need money and this is how they raise it. And when you think of it in that functionality, like nobody would ever get reelected ever if they had to take responsibility for the fact that they levied these taxes. So
we need to go back to writing a check once a year to the IRS. Then people would be mad if it didn't come directly out of their paychecks every week.
You think that's the problem, is that because they take it a little bit at a time?
Notice. Yep. Yep. If
and then you get that
a $7,000 check to the IRS every April, people would be pissed.
I mean, I'm somebody who's firmly aware of the taxes that I pay. So even that little bit of like withholding to me is very clear to me. We talked a little bit about this in the state meeting today because we were talking about young people in their college age being socialists. But then
Uh-oh. Oh, I think we've lost Casey.
Don't worry, you got a backup, Casey.
Yeah, here it goes. My internet froze for a second. There should be like some music that cues up when my internet freezes. You guys should be like, yay. Yeah, so the young people, once they start actually working, and then they see like how much taxes they get. Jessica, when you first went into the workforce, like, did you start to? Let me ask you this: when did you become aware of this wage garnishment scenario, and when did you start getting concerned and pissed about it?
I was immediately aware of it because my dad prepared me for it. So when I started working, it was right after I turned 16. As soon as I became eligible to have a job, I started working. Mm-hmm. But it was one of those situations where my dad explained to me, this is what your paycheck is going to look like. You are going to pay taxes, and this is what that means. So that was something that I was already aware of.
Casey, what about you? So you were in the military for a little while. When did you start thinking about your fair share and what that looks like?
So I remember I was working my first job that was not just cash, working for some person or whatever, but my first like official tax job was a fast food job. And I believe my first job was at Taco Bell. I was 15 and a half, I want to say, with a work permit. I had to get a permit signed to work. And then, so I got my first paycheck, and, I was making, I don't know, $4.25 an hour or something. And I wasn't even worth that, I'll be honest. But so, I put all my hours in for the week. I get my paycheck or whatever, and I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, okay, I work, 20 hours or and then my paycheck is not that. And I was like, what's going on here? Where's all my money at? And
who's FICA and why is he taking my paycheck?
Exactly. Like, what is FICA and what is this stuff? And they're like, oh, well, these
who is this FICA?
Yeah, nobody explained to me what taxes were. And so I'm like, they said, well, that's, you pay for, Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. I'm like, sure, whatever those are. And then state taxes, income, all this stuff. And it was like, I remember the feeling that I had was, well, I guess if that's the way it is, then that's just what I have to deal with. And then the other part was like, well, if they're taking it, I guess they're doing good things with it. So I guess that's fine. And that's just, this is my life now. It's like you come to that sudden realization when something is going to be different for you than you expected it to be for forever. And you're like, well, this is my life now. And
I am inevitable.
Yeah, you just like you're just resigned to it,
Yeah.
And only as I got to be older and started actually looking into those things. I mean, I had to have been in my late 20s before I started going, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, So, yeah, that was a rough realization as a teenage kid. So.
I think it really impacts people a lot more who are in incentive-based pay structures. So people who receive a lot of bonuses, like people in sales. I think that realization hits a little bit harder because bonuses are taxed differently than standard wages or salaries, right? And I actually had some employees recently. I did a sweeping increase for all my employees last fall, and we did bonuses this first of this year for them, and a lot of them were pretty unhappy with their bonus, but I had to explain to them that's because it's taxed differently, and that realization for them, that realization for them was just, it was like, wait a minute, like, it's your government at work, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what frustrates me about that specifically, and Melissa, I want you to kind of weigh in on this too, because when we think about a regular like W-2 hourly wage, this is my salary, blah, 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 right? Then you go, okay, there's a percentage, I can predict that, right? But if we start looking at bonuses are these are people who are being incentivized to do extra, right? To do more, to make a higher dollar sale, to make create a better customer relationship. Like the bonuses are a direct result of positive performance. Exactly. So then you're being negatively, you're being punished for positive performance in that case, where I've heard people say, like, I just want to get paid straight salary. I don't want a bonus because I don't want to have to pay the extra taxes. And as a business owner, you start thinking, like, wouldn't it be better if I just did that instead of doing bonuses? But at the same time, you're like, yeah, but I need to be able to incentivize them. And this is a great extrinsic incentivization. So what do you think, Melissa, in terms of like, from a bonus-based structure, like, is there a tax structure that would not make you feel like you are getting screwed?
Well, I'm a fan of sales tax. If there's going to be a tax, a sales tax. I'm also not adverse to a flat income tax. Your first $40,000 is completely tax-free. And then everything after that is whatever percent it is. So if you make 50,000, you pay 10% of 10,000. If you make 500,000, you pay 10% of 150 or 350,000. Mm-hmm. My math's way off.
You're fine. It's Saturday. I'm not going to math. I'm not going to math today either.
The math's wrong. But the concept.
Bad idea for taxes to be our topic on Saturday. I'm like, how much vodka have I had? So taxes are meant to be our shared responsibility, but I think entrepreneurs and I think sales bonuses, people who are incentivized with bonuses, I think they pay an unfair share. I don't think there's such a thing as a fair share. So even this idea of like the fair tax, I don't think that's a thing. The only fair share to me is the tax that you get to decide how much you're willing to pay. Mm-hmm. Period. Right. And sales tax is the only one that really is even remotely close to that, where you can decide
food
essentials
food from that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. Like, I'm even okay with paying a little bit more for my bottle of wine or a little bit more for our organic vegetables, right? Like, I'm on food. I'm okay. Like, I'm willing to go a little bit with taxing a little bit of food. But yeah, especially because we have so many free food. What did I share with you earlier this week, Jessica? Maybe we're going to do a whole episode on it about something like 1 in 8 Americans are on the SNAP, which is the food substance, right? They used to be food stamps. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's supplemental nutrition. Yeah. There's a lot of people getting assistance on food. So I'm actually not that opposed on the taxation of food. Like, I'm not afraid of that. If I'm not paying taxes on anything else, if I'm only paying sales tax, I'm okay with paying sales tax on food. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I get to decide what I'm going to buy. Right. And then we could tax things like Doritos higher than we tax, tomatoes. And then it would be a fat tax. It'd be a junk food tax. And then we could try to like thin tax people into dieting. Jessica, have you thought about starting your own business where tax is a reason you decided not to?
So actually, my husband and I did start a business. He was let go from a job a few years ago, and in between jobs, we started a small business. Taxes were not a reason that we decided not to continue with it, but I will say that just keeping track of all of that to make sure that everything was done properly, because we didn't want to get in trouble, that was such a point of stress for me that it made it not worth it. Like, all of the work that we had to do to make sure that we weren't going to get in trouble for this little business that we started just to get by, to me, it wasn't worth it. So,
well, I don't blame you on that.
I feel like $500 a month and you're afraid of going to jail.
Yeah.
Paperwork error for $500 a month.
Right. Or you're going to have to pay thousands of dollars in interest and fees to the government because you screwed up your return, because you forgot a receipt for a $5 meal at Burger King on the road or whatever. Yeah.
And I don't blame you. I don't think it's worth it to have a yard sale, considering like at this point, I can't even imagine having a once annual yard sale. Yeah. Casey, have you thought about having a business where tax is a deterrent for you?
Not about having a business, but being in real estate, it's really interesting. The entire U.S. tax code, at least at the federal level, tremendously above any other income stream, incentivizes real estate investment. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, probably because the people that wrote it owned property. But if you think about, like, if we give money to something to incentivize it, right, then taking money disincentivizes it. So if you disincentivize real estate, what you end up with is a lack of property, because if it's taxed just like everything else, it makes real estate investors less likely and less able financially to invest in property. And so I started investing in property. It's a long story, but it had to do with I got cancer, and so I didn't know if I was going to die or not. And so I needed to figure out a way to provide for my family after I died. And we planned our income, our family, to be a one income family. So that meant that was me. And so if I didn't want my wife to be like, single working mom, I had to figure out a way to do that. So I looked into real estate sooner than I would have anyway. And it turns out that it's very tax advantaged. And one of the biggest ways that it's tax advantaged is that you don't pay FICA tax when on rental income. And if you think about it, so we think about FICA.
Yeah.
What's that?
Isn't that like 14 or 15%?
It's 12%.
A big percentage. Well,
as a W-2 earner, if you include all of them, Social Security is like 98% of that 12%. But if you work a regular W-2 job, you pay 6% and your employer pays the other 6%. So you're actually, in effect, 12% less better off because of the Social Security plan. And of course, we're all like Gen X or close to it here, so none of us are going to get Social Security anyway. But so when I found out that all my rental income is already 12% better off than my wage income, that changed everything. And the fact that you can write off your stuff, and I mean the entire, like I said, I could go on for hours about taxes on real estate income. But I mean, if you are a employer or somebody who works at a job in the United States, you are punished for that productivity in taxation. And what taxation actually ends up doing is, for the most part, it takes productive value and output that you put into the economy and it destroys it.
Yeah.
It's like as if you were working at a factory and you made 1,000 widgets of it a day, and 25% of those widgets were just thrown into a dumpster and lit on fire.
Yep. That's exactly right. So when we think about wanting to use entrepreneurs to rebuild our economy, and all these federal programs are going to help entrepreneurs, and we're going to, in my book, Practical Entrepreneurism, there's a whole chapter on all these training programs and hub zones and all these kinds of things that the state, federal, and city and county levels are doing to try to encourage entrepreneurism, when really all you have to do is stop taxing the shit out of us. Stop
Get out of the way.
Exactly. Like, you don't have to give me office space. You don't have to teach me how to manage my books or give me a free lesson on QuickBooks. Like, I don't need any of that garbage. I just need you to get out of the way and stop taxing me to death. We said this last week on the show. I said it last week on the show. I think the best thing that government can do for entrepreneurs is give you 5 years. Make a go of this. And for 5 years, we won't touch it. We won't ask you for any money. We won't ask you for any taxes. We're not going to worry about how you're doing this. But at the 5-year mark, come to us and tell us how you've done. And then we'll figure out, what does it look like for you moving forward? But I mean, just give us a chance. But the idea that right off the bat, to Jessica's point, I mean, I don't want to get in trouble for $500 worth of income because now I'm paying $10,000 in fees. The show notes are out on parentingporcupines.com. And Jessica found some bullet points here.
Melissa found those, actually.
Did you find it, Melissa? 15% of small business owners spend more than $10,000 on the administrative fees for federal taxes.
Mm-hmm.
$10,000.
It's not just the cost. That's not the cost of the taxes. That's the cost to file them and do the paperwork and spend the time to do that. That's on top of whatever taxes.
Yeah.
That's just compliance cost. That's not taxation.
And most businesses are micro businesses that don't even earn $100,000 a year, right? Most businesses are micro businesses that are earning less than $1,000 a month. And so if you think you're earning $12,000 a year and you're spending, $5 to maybe $1,000 to $5,000 on tax compliance, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
It's significant.
An Uber driver is a small business.
Yeah. We could have a whole conversation about whether or not Uber should allow their drive. So whether or not the 1099, whose advantage is a 1099 employment scenario, right? And Uber will tell you they never intended for people to be full-time Uber drivers. They expected this to be a side hustle. They expected it to be part-time income, right? And then how do you create a business where most of your workers are meant to be part-time workers? How do you maintain that when you get as big as a company like Uber does? My strategic management class loves that topic. We pull it up all the time. My students are just like, why can't these people make a living wage? I'm like, why can't they get a real job? Uber driving is not a real job. Like, it was never meant to be a real job. But anyway.
Not a career.
All right. So one of the other points that you made in our show notes is entrepreneurism offers freedom, but it's also really hard. And so, Jessica, back to you. You guys decide, you think you're going to start this business. What happens? What makes you think like this is just not for us?
It was a lot of work. I mean, it was a lot of work. And that is something that I think needs to really be at the heart of this conversation, because a lot of times when you start talking about taxes and taxation being theft, people get very emotional about that, right? And it becomes this conversation of, we have a responsibility to pay these taxes to take care of other people, right? We need to do this. But if you take that and apply it to a person who's trying to start a business, who's trying to take care of their family, what right do you have to their labor? What right do you have to the product that they have invested their time, their sweat, their money, their tears to give, right? Like that is what they are doing to support their family. What right do you have to take away from them? And so we decided that it just wasn't worth the amount of work that we were going to have to put into it at this point in our lives. Now, had we been much younger, we probably, would have stayed the course, maybe. But it was kind of it was something to get us through a immediate, that period in between. And we just didn't have it in us to put that much into it to make it successful, because, it takes years to build a successful business, and if you're paying all these fees and taxes, just isn't worth it. Some people think it is, and that's great, but we didn't.
Yeah. And so we talk about that in entrepreneurial circles here in Columbia a lot in terms of what's the return on investment? What are you going to get back? Yeah. How much money can you really make off of this business? What are you really going to get back? And there's a romantic side to it of like, I'm going to be my own boss and I'm going to be able to build my own thing. But every entrepreneur I know will tell you that they work harder in their own business than they ever did working for somebody else.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Casey, is there a particular libertarian philosophy that brought you to, or that you hang on to or cling to or think about in terms of taxation and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that, I'm not an anarchist, or we have a lot of anarchists in our circle that are for no government. And I think that is eventually ideal. And I would love to get to that place. It's in my heart of hearts, But I kind of maintain being a classical liberal, kind of a minarchist, courts, cops, fire department, that kind of thing. That the minimum that makes sense, and those things, and that would include roads, because that's always the first thing. Even though toll roads exist, and so we pay as you go things. But for me, the big thing is like, I think that people. Just like children, I think that adults maintain the quality of children, that we are natural explorers, we're natural learners, we're natural workers, not like factory workers. But what I mean is if you let somebody, I mean, that's always the question. What would you do if you had, $10 million? If you won the lottery, what would you do? And the question, people always say like, oh, I'd love to work on old cars, or I'd love to, do this or whatever. Like, that's somebody's passion. And very few people, unlike outside of office space, I suppose, would say, I would just do nothing. I'd just sit around and do nothing. Yeah. Even retired people will tell you that sitting around and doing nothing isn't what it's cracked up to be.
It's nice for a week or two, but
yeah, we have this desire to pursue things. Like, think about outside your work. You work a 8-to-5 job or whatever, and you come home, and then what do? Well, you have hobbies. Well, I build miniature sailboats inside, glass jar. I don't do that. I'm just saying an example. That's something that sounds terrible to me, but somebody takes meticulous time and energy and perfects their craft at doing that. And so just imagine the things that are not profitable because of taxation and regulation and all these hoops that you have to get to and go through. Just imagine the things that could be done and the ways that human beings could branch out into the world and create for humanity if they weren't hampered by an artificial weight around their neck. Because that's exactly what these things end up being. And I'm not talking about regulations like, okay, let's not put acid in our food and things like that. I mean, I'm talking about, like you have to check this box and you have to have this license, and, like your dog walking licenses in New York State, that's not something that's not a regulation that's keeping people safe or keeping dogs safe. It's just a revenue mechanism. Yeah. I'm talking about regulations that are really superfluous, that get tossed out in the sense of an emergency. One of the first things they did during the coronavirus was toss out all these regulations. Well, if we don't need them during an emergency, then we don't need them not at all.
Well, and a lot of those regulations are built to create barriers to entry to protect businesses that are already in that industry. Yes. And so this is where we have
by legislators.
Exactly, which is where those regulations, they're not protecting anybody except the businesses that are operating there, that know that they would lose their customer base if they had to actually compete for it. And I think that it's important. We talked a lot about that last week. It's important to be clear about which regulations are consumer protection regulations and which ones are simply there because businesses are rigging the system in their own direction. Melissa, we're at 32 minutes, so we're getting to final thoughts on this, but I want to find out real quick how you talk to your kids about this, because they're at the age now where maybe they're aware that taxation is a thing. Like, I know we're all like, taxation is theft, whoop, whoop, but like, I mean, are you talking to them about like entrepreneurship at all, or like what are talk about your kids for a second?
Yes, we actually just started a cookie company, and my name's on all the paperwork because I'm the adult, but it's my son's company. He's 10. He does the baking. He designed the logo thing, and we're like walking through the different. I explained, well, now we need this business license. We need a sales tax license, and I've walked him through the whole process. But my children have been aware of taxation forever. As soon as they go on their first trick-or-treating. Because my husband has instituted a Reese's peanut butter cup tax. He makes them put all the peanut butter cups on the table. He takes half.
Wow.
They are his peanut butter cups. We are a high tax household.
What's the website for the cookie company? I'm going to put it up on a banner so people can get to it.
Oh my goodness. CharlestonContrabandCookies.com.
Oh, I love it.
That's an amazing name.
Yes.
I love it.
It's funny that you said that, Melissa, because the meme that I posted today reminding everybody to tune in this evening was an ice cream cone, and it said, teach your kids about taxation, eat half their ice cream.
Yeah, we eat half their candy.
Yep.
And they cry.
We definitely have we have the parent tax in this house too, where like Holly, French fries, macaroni and cheese. I'll make her a big pot of macaroni and cheese and take a big spoonful of it. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, like a bite out of the peanut. Like, I don't know that Holly's ever had a PB&J that didn't have a bite already taken out of it, because mom can't eat the whole sandwich, but I'll take a bite out of it. And it's all parent taxes here. Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, what about you? Do you talk to your kids about taxation? What do you say to them?
Oh yeah, we talk about it a lot. I mean, we've had the conversation about what taxes are, how they impact us, because I actually part of a big part of my salary is incentive based. And so I have to wait and get a big chunk of what I make once a year, and it is taxed significantly. Mm-hmm. And so that is an example that we've used with our children. We've also used the property tax example, you know, that mm-hmm. we pay taxes every year on our house, and what happens if we don't pay the taxes, and that sort of thing. So my kids are very aware. And that's also part of what we talk about when we're watching TV, when we're watching the news or whatever programming. And if they talk about new bills that Congress wants to pass, you know, if they include things like new programs, we talk about where does that money come from? So my kids understand that money is being taken from citizens to put toward these programs so they can work through that. But we do talk a lot about that in our house.
Yeah, I think it's worth it for kids to have some visibility to that. So to Casey's point about not being prepared for that when you got your first job at Taco Bell, and then realizing all of a sudden, like all this work that you've done, you didn't have a right to the fruits of your own labor from the very beginning, even at age 15. Your little man is just 6, but are you taking bites out of his chocolate chip cookies? Or are you giving him that particular lesson?
I'm not giving the Ron Swanson lesson on taxes and government yet. We haven't introduced him to the horrors that is taxation quite yet, but I definitely will be talking to him about taxes and entrepreneurship and stuff when the time is right, because I find that we have these barriers for children to get into the workforce and even entrepreneurship. And what ends up happening is, because we make it so difficult for even adults, but also for kids to start their own businesses, that they give up and they feel like the only way they can live is to be subject to an employer. Like, oh, what am I going to do? I have to find a job because I need money to live. I have to eat. And so I'm dependent on an employer and finding a job that I can do. And what do I do if there's no jobs and I can't get one? And it's this peril that they're in, and that we find ourselves in. A lot of people do, instead of going, wait a minute, how about I just make my own job? I mean, I paid some kids to come and they raked my leaves. I mean, they were out here for like 3 hours. It's my favorite example of small businesses for kids is raking leaves, because it requires almost nothing. And it's pure profit. It's not difficult labor. I mean, it is for me because I'm old and out of shape, but as a young in shape high school kid, it's not so bad. And I think I paid them. They ended up making like 15, 20 bucks an hour, you know, to rake some leaves. It was incredibly valuable to me. And I'm sure that was incredibly valuable to them. But if that was above board, not only would they not be legally allowed to do it, because I'm not sure that everybody was work age or had a permit, or, you know, they'd have to pay taxes. That'd be, 12% on the income for the federal FICA. And then you've got state income tax and then I'd have to 1099 them. And that, you know what I mean? It ends up, they probably have to have a permit as a small business to operate in the town, which I'm thankfully just outside of the town, but
insurance of some sort.
Because what if they were to hurt themselves? And then,
licensing, bonding. And I mean, we're talking about kids raking leaves, and it creates a society and a culture of dependency on employment instead of a culture of self-empowerment and lack of dependency on other people. And those are the things that weren't taught to me as a kid. My parents had good quality jobs. My dad was my stepdad was in the union and had like a retirement and all that stuff. And my mom was at an insurance company for years. And, those things don't exist for us now. And nobody told us they'd be going away. So I grew up thinking like, I need to get a good job and work at that job for 25 years. And then I can have a pension and a retirement.
But that anxiety extends even further than just the get a job, because my college students are feeling that anxiety around the get a job, but it's get good grades so that I'm hireable. It's get good grades so I can get into a good college, so I'm hireable. It's get good grades in middle school so I can take the right classes in high school, so I can get into a good college, so I can get good grades and be hireable. Like that anxiety goes all the way down to these 12-year-old kids that are, you know, it's middle school, man. Like, take that pressure
No
off.
one
I think you're
cares.
exactly. Let's homeschool. Boom. Okay. All right. So welcome. Thank you everybody for watching. We're at 39 minutes, which is a little bit longer than we normally go, but thank you so much, Casey Crow, for being part of our broadcast this week. Jessica, Melissa, I'll see you guys next week. We haven't decided on topic yet, but I have a feeling it's going to be something along the same lines as this, because we've had a lot of good mileage out of this. You guys are awesome. You're rock stars. Have a great weekend.